Most of what you've been taught about anger is wrong. And the part nobody told you, the part that changes everything, is what your anger is actually for. By the end of this, you'll never hear it the same way again. You were taught that it's a problem to be managed, a temper to be controlled, a red, ugly thing that good people keep on a leash and bad people let loose. You learn to apologize for it, to swallow it, to count to 10, to calm down. And if you were really well trained, you learn to stop feeling it at all, to go straight past the heat into a smooth, reasonable numbness, and call that maturity. But I want to offer you a different way of hearing it, because anger is not the enemy. Anger is a messenger, and the message is almost always more important than the noise it arrives in. I'm the voice of shadow and self. I read the psychology so you don't have to, and I tell you the parts about yourself most people would rather not say out loud. So here's one of them. The reason your anger feels so dangerous is not that it's destructive, it's that it's honest. It knows something about you that the polite, agreeable, mask-wearing part of you has been working very hard not to know. Let's go back to Jung for a moment. He talked about the shadow, everything you've pushed out of your conscious self because it didn't fit the image you were supposed to project. For most of us, raw anger lives down there in the dark. We were told, in 100 small ways, that anger was unsafe, or unkind, or unbecoming. So we exiled it. We became easygoing. We became the calm one. And we paid for it without ever sending the invoice to ourselves. Because here's what the textbooks on anger management leave out. Anger that gets exiled doesn't get smaller. It gets strategic. It stops coming through the front door and starts leaking out the back. It becomes the sarcasm you didn't mean to use, the resentment that flattens your voice, the sudden, disproportionate fury at the slow driver, the loaded dishwasher, the one small thing. Because the one small thing is carrying the weight of 1,000 things you never let yourself feel. When you refuse to feel anger directly, you don't escape it. You just lose the ability to read it. So let's learn to read it instead. I want you to think of anger as an alarm wired to something you actually care about. An alarm doesn't go off for no reason. It goes off because a line was crossed. And underneath nearly every flash of genuine anger, there is one of 3 messages waiting to be heard. The first message is, a boundary was crossed. This is the simplest one and the one we ignore the most. When someone takes more than you offered, talks over you, uses you, dismisses you, the anger that rises is not a character flaw. It's your psyche's immune system. It's the part of you that still knows you have edges, even when you've spent years pretending you don't. People who can't feel anger usually can't hold a boundary either. The two are the same muscle. The second message is harder, and it points inward. Sometimes anger is grief that hasn't been allowed to be grief. It's so much easier to be furious than to be heartbroken. Fury makes you feel powerful. Sorrow makes you feel small. So when something breaks your heart, a betrayal, a loss, a hope that died, the psyche will often hand you anger first, because anger is the bodyguard that grief sends ahead of it. If your anger feels strangely bottomless, ask what it's standing in front of. Very often, it's protecting a sadness you weren't ready to face. And the third message is the one almost nobody wants to hear. Sometimes your anger at someone else is anger at yourself, turned outward so you don't have to feel it. You're furious that they disrespected you, but underneath, you're furious that you let them. You rage at their selfishness, but it echoes the times you abandoned yourself to keep the peace. This is the shadow at its most clever. It would rather you burn at the world than turn the lamp on what you did to survive. 3 messages: a boundary crossed, a grief unspoken, a self abandoned. And the only way to know which one is knocking is to do the thing we're all trained not to do, to stay with the anger long enough to listen, instead of either exploding it outward or swallowing it whole. Because those two options, explode or suppress, are not actually opposites. They're the same mistake. Both of them refuse to hear the message. The person who erupts and the person who goes numb are both avoiding the same conversation. One is too loud to listen. The other has unplugged the phone. There's a third way, and Jung would call it the beginning of integration. It sounds almost too simple. You feel the anger fully in the body, the heat, the tightening, and instead of acting on it or burying it, you ask it a question. What are you protecting? What line was crossed? What am I not letting myself feel underneath you? You treat the anger not as a verdict, but as a witness, not as something to obey, and not as something to silence, but as something to interview. When you do this, the most remarkable thing happens. The anger that you feared would consume you becomes, instead, one of the most reliable forms of self-knowledge you have. It tells you what you value. It tells you where you've betrayed yourself. It tells you what you've been too afraid to want. A person who has befriended their anger is not a more explosive person. They are, almost always, a more honest, more grounded, and strangely calmer one, because nothing is leaking out the back anymore. It's all coming through the front, on purpose, in their own voice. So the next time the heat rises in your chest, I want you to resist both old reflexes.